I've always framed the discussion of the pandemic as a way to expose what was already present.
I don't think there's been a riot in Erie since the 1960s.
There are many that have lived in our communities for generations that have felt unheard, that have felt unseen.
When the system refuses to move along with these people, they naturally rebel, as they should.
If you are, participating in all the civic processes and you're still not seeing your needs responded to or your interests reflected, or people that look like you sitting at boards and commissions, what other means do you have to be heard, to be seen?
More so than any other time in my lifetime, that people are really starting to respond and say that they've had enough.
There are people in our community that are hurting, who have been hurting for a very long time.
You have a lot of events where you have things like Ferguson, Minnesota, Baton Rouge, take your pick, New York. And there's a whole history of police brutality in America.
Our Black neighbors are the ones that receive the brunt of that.
What are we going to do to stop that? How can you, in good consciousness, watch something like that and not be affected by it?
It's a really hard thing to stomach.
We have, as a society, left our police fairly unchecked.
And acts like what we saw on May 30th are in response to that.
The police in the city deemed the protest at one point unlawful. Violence kind of ensued from there.
A lot of windows being broken, fires being set, a man shot by another protester. They also had some fireworks they were shooting at the police.
We had a couple smashed windows and a small fire on one of our tables.
There's about 17 police officers injured in the riot.
In the moment, you're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. Another moment in 2020 where I'm like, oh my gosh, I might have lost my business today.
People can demonstrate against anything and express their opinions. That's the American way. We all have freedom of speech. But if they turn violent, that we cannot allow and we need to stop.
Which is scary to know that, if I'm protesting, which is well within my rights as a U.S. citizen, that at any point the police can deem this unlawful. And now I'm no longer allowed to protest, even though it's a right of ours.
I'm pretty proud of the way our police handled everything that night.
But I think they really missed the mark on really understanding why these things are occurring, instead of just it says here we're not allowed to do that.
It's very rare that there is no violence in protests, and that's what gets the attention.
We don't need to be mad about this. We can be mad about what's caused broken windows.
That's not to say that I, support vandalism against properties, but I understand where that comes from.
I know that I had some conversations with folks who were, upset for us, and being able to have those conversations and saying, you don't need to worry about it. We recognize where this is coming from, and we hope that you can too.
It's a subject that makes everybody uncomfortable.
It's really easy to let anger get in the way. It's a much easier emotion than really digging into why someone's grieving.
We need to talk. And I've tried to reach out to some of the groups and have some conversations with some of the groups that have kind of been leading some of the protests.
It's not just the symptom of what's happening, which are the riots, but really the underlying cause of that grief and hurt.
We're going to have some really difficult conversations.
And is how we police our communities the right way?
I've done diversity training with the police and the fire department, a gazillion treatment facilities. We have some of the right people. I'm an advocate for the police.
We have a council called SPCP. It's called Securing Police Community Partnerships, that we actually started over 2 years ago for changes we need to make to the police to eliminate that systemic racism that's there. We're doing it to build better relationships between the police and the community, particularly the minority community.
In every group, it's these bad apples, and we need to weed them out.
Silence means consent.
Who's going to be courageous enough to point to the bad officers?
It's about time that people start understanding that you got to call it what it is, or see it for exactly what it is.
There are topics that we avoid talking about, or conversations that we avoid having because they make us, and when I say us, I mean white people, uncomfortable.
We don't talk about it because it's painful.
Would I like us to be able to have these conversations without violent protests? Yes. The reality is these conversations would not be happening had our windows not been broken.
I totally understand when some folks say, like, I'm tired. Why are we having discussions again?
So when we talk about things like Black Lives Matter, the reason people are so fatigued of it so quickly is they don't know the history, that the issue of Black Lives Matter has, since the foundation of the United States, has been an issue.
I think what's needed is the courage of a president to actually take the knee to do that and to kind of acknowledge our past was great, but not great for everyone.
Our democracy is built on the institution of whiteness and race, and that's legislated constitutionally. We're all created equal. Yet at the very signing of that Constitution, every one of the writers had slaves. Black people are inferior, and we're putting that in writing, and we're willing to fight and die for that. That's part of our history, and that has been socialized until we get to 21st century, and here we are. And I tell people, don't make an apology for it. It is our history, but definitely have an acknowledgement of it. It is history, and you should acknowledge it.
And to acknowledge that big mistakes have been made and that the heritage continues in both ways, the great things we've done in our history, but also the not so good things.
Even though I don't consider myself racist, I think there's still some of those built-in biases that we all have, regardless of the color of our skin, when we see people that look different than us.
We make distinctions about those who are very light or white and those who are very dark or black. We make all kinds of decisions based on that criteria.
This starts at home.
That subject matter has to be learned. And so we are passing from one generation to another a way of thinking and feeling about race.
Maybe our history books in the school need to change.
When you are in the position to tell the story, you can tell any way you want to. I need to hear all the stories, all the narratives, not just one.
This affects everybody on every level.
All of us at some level are standing on the shoulders of someone. Sometimes that's a really difficult conversation to have.
The poverty rate of African Americans throughout the country is a lot higher than of the counterparts in the white communities. In Erie, it's almost double.
The reason that these communities are impoverished has very little to do with the people who reside in them. In America, the company called the Realtor, the real big R, there was by policy that said you will not sell property to anyone other than white or Caucasians. And so this notion of redlining is where it comes from. You are relegated to this area, so reusing resources over and over and over again and not having the ability to get resources from any other place is why this area has remained poor. You find that across America, and you find that in Erie.
There are some socioeconomic barriers that are inherent in lending. It's very black and white. If you don't meet these certain credit criteria, then you can't receive those financing. You want to make sure that you provide a level playing field for everyone, and that there's equal access to all individuals.
We have one of the poorest zip code in the country right here in Erie.
The largest zip code is the 16503 zip code. It has about 17,000 people that reside there. 50% of the community is people of color. Between 80 and 83% of the people who live there do not own their own home. They rent. People are investing in other people's property. In terms of intergenerational wealth, home ownership is how you do that. It literally provides a way of increasing equity that you could transfer from one generation to another.
When you're providing equitable access to capital to individuals, you're providing a way of life for individuals.
Because there's low property tax, the schools are not as equal to other school districts. The problem with that is we start personalizing that to the individuals, that somehow there's a level of morality that's connected to the people who live in that zip code. But our environment does shape us. What's amazing is there's no other group that has been legislated so cruelly as African Americans in the Constitution. It's the issue of slavery and the economic provision that came from that.
We have to look at the policies, remove some of the barriers.
You know, you're a part of that system, and so it's hard to take a step out of that and really look and say, is this right.
It's time to make sure that there are plans in place that actually lead to more diverse offerings, as well as more diversity in staff, in boards, etc.
Whether that's in our public schools, whether that's in the city government, the talking helps, but policy is where the decisions are made.
So I am going to be establishing an internal committee to review all of our policies and procedures and programs. Does our collection reflect the community? We've seen what's happening. We want to be responsive to that. We want to be the kind of library that everybody in Erie County wants to use and wants to be affiliated with.
As a community space that we want to help facilitate those conversations.
The arts have always been a great equalizer. There's empathy building that occurs because we can start to view and digest the world through a perspective other than our own. Historically, if you look at, the Vietnam era or even the Great Depression, you had artists that were rising to be amplifiers of community voices, unify people and let them know that they weren't in a fight alone.
As a white person, it has been easy to sit back and see that as, I don't want to get political, right? Unfortunately, it did take these conversations to kind of become aware that, this is not political for other people.
And usually the best way to handle those kind of things is to stand together with protests. The system that favors protesters and listens to protesters generally fares well in the grand scheme of things.
After the initial protest, there were several nightly protests, most of them happening outside of City Hall.
The biggest one I attended was organized by some African-American clergy here in Erie.
We planned for between 250, 500 people. 2,500 people showed up.
It was a huge event. We marched down State Street. The police cooperated and blocked off the cross streets.
We just wanted to walk together. And something happened.
You could definitely feel a connection between everyone there and everyone else, regardless of the color of their skin, the gender, race. None of that mattered. It was this group of 2,500 people really wanted to build Erie and make it better.
Because people want things to change.
I was happy to be part of that.
Recently, the county just passed the resolution on racism as a major public health crisis.
We have a mayor who's been saying the right things. One of his chief missions is to eliminate racism.
I've been right next to him and saying, Mayor, that's impossible.
It is. It's a tall order. It's a tall order.
Eliminating racism, it's been around for 400 years. We've been dealing with this thing for 400 years. You're going to eliminate it in Erie?
I want every person in Erie to be accepted and valued regardless of their race, their gender, their nationality, their sexual preference, the color of their skin.
The ability to be able to say what needs to be done and to attempt to try to put things in place to try is a lot better than turning your back on it.
I'm a firm believer in hope. I'm not going to reduce the goal because people say it's impossible. And I love that, so yeah, I'm going to get behind him.
But racism definitely still exists in Erie.
You can see that fight emerge at the national level, and it's really going to need the leadership to lead us past these things that can lead a path forward where everybody emerges.
Hey, we're a city that's small enough to make change, but large enough for it to really make an impact and create this model that other cities could take and learn from and implement.
I think we're onto something.
We can have a system where everybody prospers.
We can make the change. We need to do it carefully. We need to do it even when it's uncomfortable.
You'll see an economy that is really, really growing by lifting up all individuals.
When something is happening that you recognize as racist, to speak up.
Let's talk. Let's move things forward.
Make a new friend. But make sure that the friend doesn't look like you. Doesn't come from your community. Find someone who's different and be intentional about that relationship. Because in the issues of race, we're real tentative about, I don't want to offend anybody, I don't want to hurt anybody. Just tell the truth to people. I don't know what it's like to be white and female. I don't know what it's like to be white and male. You have to tell me that. You're my expert. And then shut up and listen.